Okay everyone, this is another video where we'll be going over some new features that have been added to Crocotile 3D. In this case we'll be looking at the new skinning and rigging features. And this includes bones and vertex weights. And we'll take a look at how to apply the vertex weights. And there's a couple ways of doing it. We can do it through the transform panel, manually inputting the weights, or we could use the vertex weight tool to paint directly to the object. Okay, so and then we'll also show how to pose the bones and talk a little bit about animation and that sort of thing. Okay, so depending on when you see this video, you may want to check the documentation just to see if anything has changed, if there have been any improvements and that sort of thing. Otherwise, let's get started. It's pretty simple, but to start off we'll need to create an object. In this case I'm just going to use the block tool to just block in some basic shape here so that we can demonstrate the features. So I'll just select all the tiles and I'll right click, go to faces and create object. So we have this object created. I can select the object and go into the scene panel. I'll rename it here. I'll just call it box. And if I right click, I can go to properties, or I can just double click and it'll open the object properties. And inside the object properties there's this skin section, and we can enable a skin to mesh. It'll generate a skin to mesh in the scene. So if I move the object out of the way, we'll see this skin to mesh here at the origin position, and this will be what gets morphed and bent and by the bones. But before that can happen, we need to add some bones to the scene. So if you go to the scene panel, we have this add bone button here. We'll just click that. It adds a bone to the scene wherever the 3D crosshair is, and then we can move the 3D crosshair and add another bone, move it again and add another one. You could also use this menu here to add a bone. So now we have these 3 bones. I'll rename them just to help distinguish between them a little better. And so we'll need to kind of create a skeleton system, like a hierarchy of bones. And to do that we could just nest bones inside of other bones by clicking and dragging them. And what this does is creates this kind of skeletal system where you have bones kind of attached to other bones. So now that it's like that, if I select this bone, bone 2, and I rotate it, all of its children bones rotate with it. Okay, so that'll be useful when we're posing the skeleton and that sort of thing. So now that we have bones added to the scene, we'll want to bind the bones to our object, to our skinned object. So if we go into the object properties and the skin section, we have the bones listed here now, and we'll have to choose a root bone, basically the bone that all the other bones are attached to. So we'll choose this bone, and now that bone and all the other bones are associated with our object and skin. So now we'll want to position our skeleton in its base pose the way that well, the base pose is how do I explain what the base pose is? It's the position where everything isn't bent or morphed. So it's like the pose that the default pose, I guess. So first we have to go into object edit mode. I'll just click the object and hit enter, and now we're editing the object as you normally would edit an object. And while we're in this mode, we can select our skeleton and move it around where we want it to be. And so I'll position it there inside the tiles. And you noticed how the tiles became gray, and that's basically displaying the vertex weights in colorized form using vertex colors. It's just a visual way of displaying the vertex weights. And if you go into the transform panel, down at the bottom there's a skin section, and if you have a bone selected and you have this option enabled, it'll show the vertex weights. Since we don't have any weights assigned to the vertices yet, it just shows it as a gray color. Okay, so there's a couple ways of assigning the weights to the vertices. You can do it manually here in the transform panel, or you could paint the weights using the vertex color weight tool here in draw mode. But first I want to show you how to do it manually, because it might be clearer that way as to what's going on. So each vertice of a skinned mesh can be assigned up to 4 bones, and each one with a weight or an influence it has on that vertice. So you can see here we have 4 drop-down lists, and with the numbers next to them indicating the index number of where a bone can be assigned to a vertice. Okay, so if we select all of these vertices here, I also have camera base selection off so that it selects all of them on all sides. If we select these vertices and we want to assign this selected bone to these vertices, we can choose which slot to add it to. Okay, and we have 4 available slots here. So I'm just going to add it to index 0, and I'll choose the bone that we have selected. And then I can select a specific weight to assign to all these vertices for this bone. And I'll hit set. Now you can see the color changes to indicate that these vertices are influenced by this bone 100%. Okay, and it's this orange color here. You could also change the colors in the skinning section of the settings if you want to change like what color corresponds to what weight value. But anyways, that's basically how you assign vertex weights manually. So if you could use this drop down box here to select a different bone pretty easily, and you can go through the list of bones, and you notice how the colors change to show what weights are assigned to what bone. Okay, so let's go to the next bone, deselect those vertices, and now we want to assign these vertices to this bone. Okay, so I could, now these vertices here already have a bone in this slot. Okay, so I want to choose a different slot, a different index in this case, so that I don't overwrite those vertice weights here. Okay, so I'm going to choose index 1, and I'll choose bone 2. Okay, the bone that we have selected, and I'll just assign these vertices another weight of 1, I guess. Assign it like that. So now you see the color changes, okay, to show the new weight values. These over here on the left, I'll deselect those two so they could select in those. These here have a full influence, are fully influenced by this bone. That's why they're orange. But these here on the other side have become yellow. Okay, and this is because these vertices are being influenced by not only this bone that's selected, but the bone we had selected previously. So they kind of have like a 50% influence of this bone and 50% influence of this other bone. So the influence of the bone that we have selected shows us a yellow color because it's not 100% weighted to this bone. It's kind of split. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay, so now if we go back to the first bone and look at the vertex colors, you'll notice how these are now yellow again. They're not orange like they were when we first assigned them. So you can get an idea based on the color of the vertex coloring how the weights are influencing, being influenced by the bones. Okay, so if we go back to bone 2, we could change this weight, and we can make this weight for bone 2. We could give it a smaller value. Let's say we give it 0.5. Now their influence is even less. So you can kind of mess with the weighting on each vertex to get different levels of influence the bones have on them. Okay. In this case, I'm just going to keep it 1 for simplicity. Now we're not finished assigning the vertices weights. We still have the last bone, so we could select the last bone here, and I'll deselect all the vertices. Now in this case, I'll select all of them. I'll just do the same operation. In this case, we'll choose index to this slot right here, and we'll choose the bone, and we'll just assign a weight of 1 to them. So now we have weights assigned to all the vertices, and you could go through all the bones and check them. You can see how for this bone that color changed over here as well, because now they're being shared between 2 bones instead of just 1 bone. So that level of influence that the bone has changed because it has to be balanced. Like one bone doesn't have 100% influence over vertices if another bone is also influencing it, if that makes sense. So that's a way of manually setting the vertex weights. And to help see how the weights are assigned, you could kind of hover over these drop down lists, and it'll give you it'll say what bones are assigned to the vertices that you have selected. So if I hover over this one, it says it's 4 vertices are assigned to bone 8 and of that index slot. Okay, and also if you hover over the weight here, it tells you as well. So like if I select just these vertices back there, I know they're assigned to this index 0 to this bone. I could change these to have a weight of 0.5. You can see kind of the color changes a little bit over there. And now if I hover over if I select all these, so I select more, and then I hover over here, you can see how now it displays 0.5, 4 vertices have that weight, and 4 vertices have a weight of 1. You can see that right there. So you can get a little bit more information as to what weights are being used for the vertices that are selected here. Okay, so I'm just going to set these back to 1. So that's a manual way of assigning bones. It gives you a little more control over how things are set, basically. So now there's another way of assigning vertex weights, and that's by using the vertex color weight tool in draw mode. You have to switch to draw mode and select this, and now you can, with a bone selected, you can just paint directly to the tiles and it will assign a vertex weight to those vertices. Okay, and it'll use this value here, right here. So like if I set this to a lower value, it'll paint a lower value, as you can see. And you just click and drag and it paints the value. And it'll pick, since you're not specifying an index or slot to paint the vertex weight to, it has to somehow choose one, okay? It doesn't know which one to assign the bone to. So it'll just kind of look for whichever slot is available and it'll assign it a vertex weight, okay? So you have a little bit less control, but it's might be a little quicker to just paint vertex weights. So it's up to you to decide which way you want to assign the vertex weights. And so you could also right-click to erase the vertex weights completely, as well as the bone assignment, and it'll just show it as gray. And you could also undo and redo the changes that you make. So in this case, we'll just stop there, and then I'll show you now that we have vertex weights assigned to the vertices, we could hit enter and it'll go back and you can move the, I need to go to edit mode, select the skeleton, position wherever you want it. In this case, we'll position it right there, back at the origin location. So now we can begin posing the bones, the skeleton, and you'll see as we rotate stuff, the mesh kind of bends and morphs with our skeleton. So you can kind of get interesting shapes. Okay, and this is because each vertice is bound to the skeleton and has a specific weight. So the bones are influencing each vertice that's kind of attached, you know. So, and based on their weight, it determines how much it gets morphed and bent by the bone. So if a vertex has less weight, it'll kind of bend and move less. Okay, so now that we have our skin to mesh bound to the skeleton, and we can pose it by rotating it, and we could even do some other stuff like scaling. You can see how that changes, or move in stuff. It kind of like bends and stretches and that sort of stuff. So now that we can do that, and we can pose stuff, you may want to like reset the pose at some time when you're animating things. So you could right click and just restore pose all, and it'll restore the position and the pose of the bone that you have selected, plus all of the nested bones, all of the children bones. So you may want to go into the scene and just right click and restore the pose for all the bones, and that's an easy way of just resetting the pose. So you can kind of, if you're like not sure, you want to like reset stuff, or you have something like posed like this and you just want to restore this pose, you go restore pose. It restores that one to the base position and pose or whatever. And if you want to restore all the nested children poses as well, you just choose that as well, and they're all back to normal. Okay, So that's one way of like going back to the default pose. That might be useful when you're animating the skeleton. And if you want to change the base pose, you can go back into object edit mode and just like move things around. Like if I want the skeleton to be, if you want the skeleton to be positioned up there, and maybe you want this bone to, oops, what's going on? Oh, I need bone selected. Oh, I have the vertices selected. I see. So if I want the base pose to be like that, attached to the object like that, I can just exit edit object mode, and now it reassigns the pose like that. But since we have the original pose, the previous pose kind of restored when you exit object edit mode, you could just kind of go back and restore pose for everything, and it'll kind of restore it back to the base pose. In this case, we just changed it, so that's why it looks like that now. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. But I'm going to just change it back because I like when things are all aligned and like that. Okay, so now that you have the skeleton set up the way that you want and everything, the vertex weights assigned, you can start like adding animations. Go into this, open the animation window, and I'll go into more detail for all the animation stuff in another video, but we'll just kind of quickly go over some stuff here. So like you can select a bone and it appears on this list here, and you can have a list of the actions here, but since we haven't added any, we could add a new action, and we could like rename it. So we'll do this like move, we'll call it move or something like that. And now you could choose which attribute to animate. You could animate the position, rotation, or a combination of them. In this case, we'll just animate the rotation of this bone, and we could add a keyframe, and then move the timer, the playhead, and then we'll rotate the bone, and then assign a new keyframe, move the bone over here. Maybe we can put it like that, assign another keyframe. So now when we play this, it'll move, it'll rotate. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And we can select the other bone. It'll list the bone here. We could add action for that bone. We could rename it. In this case, we want both to move together, so we'll give it the same name. So when you export your object, it'll include the animations if you choose GLTF or GLB format, and the actions that have the same name will be grouped together as one animation, and they'll get played together in whatever you import it into. Okay, so for this bone, I will I'll create a keyframe for the rotation, and we'll just add a keyframe there. Maybe we'll rotate it like this, add a keyframe like that. And also notice how I have this selected up here. It's a gizmo alignment, world or object. I think it's off by default, and as you can see, the gizmo here is aligned with the world, the X, Y, and Z, you could see it clear if it's on that mode. But if I click this button, it'll align it to the entity, in this case the bone. So that is useful if you want to rotate the bone relative to its current orientation. So I'll add another keyframe, maybe like that. Okay, I'm just doing some random stuff. And so now we have these two bones. We can click this to pin it so that when you deselect, they stay listed. So anyways, let's play it and see what it looks like. So you could see how you have two bones rotating, and because they're nested together, we have the skeleton system. It kind of just moves together, right? The parent moves the child object because it's nested inside of it, and that keeps everything connected. Okay, so that's basically how you would animate the bones. Okay, so now that you have it animated, basically you could right click on the object in the scene panel and choose export object, and then choose GLTF or GLB, and this is the format that supports animation. So when you export as this format, the animation actions will be included in the file. And that's basically it. There'll be an animation video going over more of the animation features. So if you want to check that out, check that out. And if you have any suggestions or feedback, leave it in the comments, or join the Discord server, and check out crocotile3d.com for more information, for documentation and that sort of thing.